So let's talk about how sperm develop. So when it comes to sperm cells, as they're traveling through the male reproductive tract, so once they are ejaculated from the epididymis, and we'll talk about these structures lastly, into the vas deferens and start to travel, they meet up with the seminal vesicle that secretes its secretions into the male reproductive tract. Now we're starting to produce semen, which is sperm cells mixed with the secretions that are delivered into the male reproductive tract by accessory glands. Okay? So semen contains sperm, 150 million sperm cells, as well as the secretions coming from the accessory glands and the reproductive tract. They have a lot of sugar, fructose, in order to make ATP, and also a lot of components that protect the sperm as they're traveling through harsh environments of the urethra that has urine in it that needs to be neutralized, and then components in the semen that will help to protect sperm cells in the female reproductive tract. That is a harsh environment for those cells as well. Okay, so one of the things that semen will do is neutralize the acidity throughout the male urethra from urine and in the female reproductive tract because it is alkaline or basic. Semen also helps to suppress the female immune response. Now we're putting something foreign into the female body, right? The immune system is gonna attack those sperm cells, but the semen suppresses or has components that will suppress the female immune response so that the female immune system doesn't attack and kill the sperm cells. There are also in semen clotting factors that help the semen kind of clot together, not into a hard, tough clot, but just coagulate together so that they travel together, they don't dissipate and are lost or are drained out of the female reproductive tract. Okay? They travel in a nice viscous, you fill in the blank. Spermatogenesis is the process of sperm development. And spermatogenesis occurs in the seminiferous tubule. We'll talk about that. See? Here, sperm develop starting with mitosis and then meiosis. So we start with a stem cell called a spermatogonia. That will divide, stem cell that has 46 chromosomes will divide through the process of mitosis and give rise to another stem cell, or spermatogonia, and to a cell that will go on through the process of sperm development. Those cells are called the spermatocytes. And the spermatocyte will go through the process of becoming a sperm cell. It starts by going into meiosis. The purpose of meiosis is to take body cells that have 46 chromosomes and to divide that in half to now make a cell that has 23 chromosomes. And those are the gametes, either the sex cells, either a sperm cell or an egg. Both of those types of sex cells don't have 46 chromosomes, but through the process of meiosis, the chromosomes have been reduced by half to 23 chromosomes. And then upon fertilization, okay, those 23 chromosomes from the sperm join with the 23 chromosomes from the egg, and now we make one cell that is the zygote, fertilized egg, that now has the 46 chromosomes back. But first, we have to make the gametes with 23 chromosomes. So sperm cells, as well as eggs of the female, process of dividing through mitosis to give rise to a cell that will go through meiosis and form that gamete. And once we have that haploid gamete that has 23 chromosomes compared to diploid that has 46 chromosomes, now that cell, that gamete, can go on to be through the process of spermiogenesis, which is how it physically changes to develop a tail, okay, it loses cytoplasm. The cell, it loses the cytoplasm that we consider the head of the sperm, and so it goes through all these physical transformations to become sperm as we know it. So again, that stem cell, the spermatogonia, will divide by mitosis. Okay? And this happens in the seminiferous tubules. We'll see those last week. It happens in the walls of the seminiferous tubules where the stem cells are. They will divide by mitosis. One will stay in the wall and become this remaining stem cell. The other will go through the process. Type A cell, when it divides, the daughter type A cell stays as a stem cell. The type B cell is a spermatocyte. It will continue through the process of changing into a sperm cell. As it continues through the process of changing into a sperm cell, it moves from the wall of the seminiferous tubule, you see a picture, to the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. And it enters into the lumen as a full-fledged sperm cell. So once we get that primary spermatocyte, the one that's going to go on through meiosis, it will go through the two phases of meiosis, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. That primary spermatocyte is still diploid, okay, 46 chromosomes. It will go through the process of meiosis, and it will get two secondary spermatocytes that now have 23 chromosomes. Okay? But they're 23 chromosomes that are duplicated. They're still duplicated chromosomes. So those will go through the process of meiosis too. Okay? And each one of those duplicated molecules of DNA will be delivered into single cells. And here we will take each of these two secondary spermatocytes. Okay? We have two. So each of those will then give rise to two spermatids, where now they have one copy of the DNA. These have two copies of the DNA, organized now in 23 chromosomes, and each new spermatid will receive one copy of that DNA. Okay? And so we went from two secondary spermatocytes that both give rise to two spermatids. So at the end of this, we end up with 4 haploid spermatids. They aren't motile yet. They don't start off being able to swim. They have to mature. And they have to go through the process of physically changing into having a tail so that it can swim. But as they are changing this way, as they're going through this process, they move from the wall of the seminiferous tubule into the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. So the function of meiosis was to divide those chromosomes in half, from 46 to 23 chromosomes. And the process of meiosis is as such. Here's that stem cell, the spermatogonia. It divides to make another stem cell and a primary spermatocyte. This is still diploid, 46 chromosomes. It has to go through the process of becoming haploid. Okay? It starts by replicating all of the DNA here. So those chromosomes start to, they're replicated. They're called tetrads here. Okay? So these chromosomes replicate. And now we go through the process of dividing this replicated DNA through the process of meiosis across two cells. Okay? And we've made haploid cells here. And then we divide again these chromosomes here. We pull these what are called sister chromatids apart and deliver a set to each daughter cell. And now these daughter cells have 23 chromosomes compared to the original stem cell that had 46. So we went from diploid to haploid, and 4 haploid spermatids. I'm gonna go actually here. So let's look into the seminiferous tubule. You'll see this lab seat. The wall of the seminiferous tubule is made of cells. The very edge of the wall is where we find the spermatogonia, the stem cells. And they will go through the process of mitosis and meiosis to give rise to haploid cells. And as that happens, they move. They move until finally you get the haploid spermatids that will then enter into the lumen. And already they're starting to physically change too. They lose cytoplasm and the heads shrink. They'll elongate, they'll develop tails, and they'll enter into the lumen as spermatozoa. So there we go again, those stem cells in the walls of the seminiferous tubule go through the process of mitosis, meiosis, giving rise to 4 haploid spermatozoa, or spermatids, sorry. And then those will physically change through the process of spermia, through the process that shrinks the head, or the actual cell, which is the head of the sperm. It loses cytoplasm, it shrinks or narrows, and a tail develops. And now, as spermatozoa, they will enter into the lumen of the seminiferous tubules. And that is, as that is happening, these cells move to the edge of the wall of the seminiferous tubule from deep within to the inner lumen, and then the spermatozoa enter into the lumen of the seminiferous tubules. And so after the spermatozoa or the spermatids are made, the haploid cells, they have to go through the physical chain, spermiogenesis, and mature into spermatozoa, where they have that elongated head and the tail. Okay, so after the process of mitosis and meiosis, we get the haploid spermatids, we enter in spermiogenesis, okay, in order to change physically into spermatozoa, or sperm cells, okay, that have that elongated head, a mid-piece where we have a lot of mitochondria, okay, and then the tail. So the sperm has the head where the DNA is contained. There aren't any mitochondria in the head of the sperm cell. All of the mitochondria are at the mid-piece in order to power that tail. In the head is the nucleus where the DNA is, and then at the tip of the head is a structure called the acrosome that contains enzymes that are going to be needed once the sperm meets the egg and has to penetrate through the wall of the egg. It uses these hydrolytic or digestive enzymes in this helmet-like structure, the acrosome, to break through the wall of the egg in order to fertilize. And then the tail is what provides motility. Now, because the sperm cells, mitochondria, are all congregated at the mid-piece and not at the head or in the head of the sperm, where we have which is the cell part where we would normally find mitochondria, when the head of the sperm enters into the egg upon fertilization, the mid-piece and tail do not. Only the head, okay? And so that makes it what they do, but because all of the mitochondria, they enter into the egg too, my apologies. Because all the mitochondria are at the tail and not in the genetic or in the head of the sperm, the head of the sperm is what's going to actually merge with the where we have the genetic material there merging with the genetic material within the egg, okay? The egg, right, provided by the female, has mitochondria in it, okay? But the mitochondria from the dad, on the sperm cell, don't contribute to any mitochondria that will be the mitochondria within the egg. And so that makes us all actually have no mitochondria from our dads. All of our mitochondria we receive from mom. Okay? And so we all, as human beings, and therefore we are all related and derived from original human beings, that there's a woman back in evolution, on the evolutionary timeline, whose mitochondria we all have today. Okay, because it's been passed down from women to children, and women to children, and women to children. Okay, same mitochondria. Interesting. Okay, so sperm, the head of the sperm. All the mitochondria are here. They don't contribute to mitochondria in the fertilized egg. All of the mitochondria in the fertilized egg are from mom in that egg. Okay, so all of our mitochondria we got from mom. The tail of the sperm, the flagella. There are hormones, and actually there's another set of cells I want to talk about real quick if I can go back. Within the seminiferous tubules, there is a population of cells, the cystinocytes. The cystinocytes secrete testicular fluid, okay, and help to take care of the sperm cells. They're nurse cells that take care of the sperm cells as they're developing and dividing in the seminiferous tubules. So they have a lot of jobs, okay? They can undergo phagocytosis and eat up cells that are faulty, something's wrong with them. They secrete particular proteins, okay, that help with testosterone. Testosterone is secreted here in the seminiferous tubules. Testosterone is what triggers spermiogenesis, the process of sperm being made in the seminiferous tubules. And we'll see all of those. Lab C, we'll see more of that. Okay, but this testosterone is the major male androgen or sex hormone. Its job is to promote spermatogenesis. Okay. So early on in development, in utero, the early weeks, we are all the same. You can't tell male from female. Okay. But when testosterone kicks in, then that fetus starts to go down the male developing tract. Okay? What would have been ovaries dropped into the scrotum to become the testes. So a lot of changes happen upon the production of testosterone that turns on the whole male characteristic development. And contributes to the secondary male characteristics as well, okay? Facial hair, more muscle mass, and so forth. So I wanted to cover that. And lab C, we will cover the anatomy of the male reproductive tract together in class. Let's go to the female reproductive tract together. See what we play. Considering here the whole point of reproduction. The whole point of reproduction is for a species to survive. Reproduction is the creation of new organisms of a species, right? Where the genetic material from a male and a female combine in a way that it produces a whole new DNA molecule that gives rise to an organism that is their own person. Okay? Doesn't look like, it's not mom, not dad, but a combination of both, because through the process of meiosis and actually fertilization, actually through the process of meiosis, you get crossing over of the genetic material between the chromosomes, okay? And that changes the chromosomes in those haploid cells so that they're different from mom's original or dad's original DNA. And so that sperm cell has gone through this process of meiosis and changing its genetic material through the process of crossing over, where chromosomes that are near each other exchange genetic material, changing that DNA molecule from the original stem cell that came from mom or dad to make the egg or the sperm. And now that haploid cell is totally different from the original stem cell that came from mom to make an egg or dad to make a sperm. Okay? And now when you combine these totally different haploid cells, a sperm and an egg, you get this totally different organism that isn't mom or dad, but a mixture genetically of mom and dad. Here's DNA, extracted from strawberries. Different organisms reproduce differently. But the whole point of reproduction is to keep a species going. And males produce their gametes, sperm cells. Females produce their gametes, the eggs or ova. And when those join together, process of fertilization, forming that first fertilized cell that is now diploid. 23 chromosomes from sperm, 23 chromosomes from egg. We've made a diploid cell that is the zygote. Comes to males, the primary sex organs are the testes. In females, they are the ovaries. The primary sex organs are called the gonads, and the sex cells are called the gametes, sperm and egg. Okay? The sex organs, the gonads, the testes and ovaries, not only produce the gametes, but they also are endocrine structures. They produce and secrete hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. And then through the reproductive tracts of the female and the male, we'll see that there are accessory organs. And we've seen in all of these tracts, there's some accessory organs that make something that they secrete into these tracts. Same here, same thing in the reproductive tract. Okay? And there are structures that are internal genitalia and structures that are external genitalia. Hormones are very important. Hormones drive the production of the gametes. Okay? They drive the projection, sex characteristics. Okay? They drive sex behavior. Okay? So in males, the androgens or testosterone, and in the females, the estrogens and progesterone. But also we'll see that there are some cells in female that do produce testosterone. We'll see that in the follicle cells that help to take care of the egg. Okay, so let's go through the female reproductive tract. So here we are. The job here is to produce the ova, the eggs, take care of the eggs, okay, store them, and then transport them through the tract, the female reproductive tract. The internal genitalia are the ovaries, the gonads, okay, where the eggs are created. Then we'll see the fallopian or uterine tubes that end in the fimbriae at the ovaries, and they are anchored, the fallopian tubes, to the uterus. Okay? And the entrance to the uterus is the cervix. It kind of dips down into the vagina. And then there are external genitalia as well. So here we are in the female reproductive tract. Here is the uterus. The entrance into the uterus is the cervix. That kind of cuts down into the vagina. So these are the internal genitalia. There are external genitalia as well. Leaving the uterus is the fallopian tube or uterine tube that ends in this petroglyph-like structure, finger-like structure that wave and kind of rub against the ovary here. And their job is to coax an ovulated egg into the fallopian tube. When you're in lab today, Lab C, take pictures of all of these models so that you have them at home and do the study. Okay, so this model is similar to our model in lab, where we enter from the outer structures into the vagina. Sorry, this is the urinary tract into the vagina here. And here's the cervix, which is the entrance into the uterus. Like the stomach, the uterus has a fundus, rounded part. Leaving the uterus are the fallopian tubes, but actually entering, joining at the uterus are the fallopian tubes, also called the uterine tubes. They end in these fimbriae that rub up against the ovary in order to catch an ovulated egg and coax it into the fallopian tube. The opening to the vagina is the vaginal orifice. So there are a lot of ligaments here that help to anchor the uterus to the body wall, help to anchor the ovaries to the uterus, as well as to the body wall. The broad ligament covers the entire uterus, so that it can't move. It holds it in place so it cannot move. The ovarian ligament helps to anchor the ovaries to the uterus. And then the suspensory ligament anchors the ovaries to the pelvic wall. And here is the vagina. Here we enter into the cervix, through the cervix, and into the uterus. The uterine tube makes its way into the uterus, and it ends in this fimbriae, right there, up at the ovaries to catch an ovulated egg and coax it into the fallopian tube. Here we are, ovary. The fimbriae of the uterine tube that leads us into the uterus. The opening to the uterus. We're coming into the vagina. The opening to the uterus is the cervix. And it's here that a fertilized egg in the uterus will implant. So here is that fallopian tube ending in the fimbriae. The ovaries have their layers. We'll see, Lab C, that the testes have their layers as well. The ovaries are surrounded, just like the testes, by this fibrous layer called tunica albuginea. And then the ovaries have a cortex, just like we saw at the kidney. There's a cortex. So here we have a cortex as well. In the cortex of the ovaries are we going to find follicles. And follicles are layers of cells that surround an egg. The egg is the oocyte. The immature egg is the oocyte. And oocyte is inside of each follicle. And those follicles are cells that surround the oocyte. Those follicle cells can be called follicle cells when we have just one layer of cells surrounding the oocyte. But then those are going to become, instead of simple, we're going to get layers of cells. Right? We're going to become stratified. And this is one of the structures that we actually look at under the microscope to see stratified cuboidal cells. The granulosa cells now are what we call the cells of a follicle when they become stratified. More than one layer of these cells surrounding a mature egg. And the follicle itself goes through the process of development, while that immature egg is going through its own processes as well. So here we are looking inside of the ovary. Here's the cortex of the ovary. And then in the middle, like we saw the kidney, is the medulla. But the kidney, the medulla is organized in those pyramids. Right? In the wall, the cortex, we have primordial follicles that will then change and start to mature. So throughout the ovary, we see follicles at different stages of development. Inside of each follicle is an oocyte. So the follicle cells surround an egg. Okay, we're going to talk more about that. Let's talk about the reproductive tract. So, all of the ducts of the female reproductive tract do not come in contact with the ovaries at all. Okay? So, what happens is that the oocyte is pushed out of the ovary and enters into the female reproductive tract. Okay? Through the fallopian tubes into the uterus. Okay? Where it fertilized it will implant. And then the vagina is also part of the female reproductive tract. Those uterine tubes, or the fallopian tubes, is the site of fertilization. So sperm cells have to make their way all the way through the cervix, the vagina, the cervix, the uterus, into the fallopian tubes, where they hopefully meet up with an egg, okay, that had been ovulated out of the ovaries and into the fallopian tube. And that's where fertilization will occur. The uterine tubes will carry the oocyte along. There are cells there that will, in the regions of the ampulla of the uterine tubes, that are ciliated. Okay? And they coax, they kind of coax and wave and move that egg along so that it moves down the female reproductive tract. Okay, so here we are. There's an ovary. Here is a depiction of follicles at different stages with an egg inside. When an egg is ovulated, pushed out of the ovary, it's caught by the fimbrane. The fimbrane coaxes it into the fallopian tube. The fallopian tube does a little peristalsis like we see in the digestive tract, pushing that little contractions that push the egg along in the uterine tube. Okay? Here is where sperm would have made their way into the uterine tube as well and fertilize an egg. That fertilized egg, the zygote now, will make its way into the uterus and implant in the wall, which signals to the female body, do not shed that lining of the uterus. We have an egg that's implanted for pregnancy. So there again, once an egg is ovulated out of the ovary, pushed out of the wall of the ovary, it's caught by the fimbrane that coaxes that into the fallopian tube. Here's the movement of the fallopian tube. Busy in there. Fallopian tube, histologically. The ciliated part of the fallopian tube, where we have the cilia of the fallopian tube that are waving those eggs along. We are ciliated fallopian tube. Ectopic pregnancy occurs when that fertilized egg implants in the uterine tube. It doesn't go into the uterus. It stays in the fallopian tube and implants there. That is dangerous, okay? That can cause just a natural aborting of the egg, okay? And it can be really dangerous to a woman. I'll let you read more of the clinical pearls there. The uterus is a muscular organ thick muscle wall necessary for uterine contractions during labor, during delivery, right? The uterus will receive that fertilized egg. That egg will implant into the wall of the uterus. And there, that fertilized egg will stay and be nourished, okay, by the blood that fills the uterus is there in order to nourish a fertilized egg. If an egg does not implant, then that inner lining of the uterus, the endometrium, and the blood will be shed, okay? And that is a woman's monthly cycle. The uterus has a body, a rounded top, the fundus, okay? The narrow lower region is called the isthmus, okay? And again, it has round ligaments that help to anchor the uterus to the pelvic wall. Okay, so there we are. There's a round ligament that anchors the uterus to the pelvic wall. Here's the fundus. Make our way down to the narrow part, the isthmus of the uterus, that then leads us into the opening into the uterus, the cervix.
A woman that has an ectopic pregnancy, does it specifically mean that there's something wrong with the semen itself?
No, it just means that that's where it is implanted. I don't think it has anything to do with the cilium on the cell.
And then also, when this egg implants into the fallopian tube, would that also still send the same signal to the body to not shed that wall, even though it's not within the uterus?
So no, it has to be in the uterus. Yep, because that's where the tissue is that would be shed. And so if you have that implantation there to tell the body, don't shed this. Okay. So, again, the cervix is the opening into the uterus, okay, that projects down into the vagina. And there's a cervical canal that communicates with the vagina and the uterus, so it allows for communication. There are glands at the cervix that secrete mucus, okay? And so once a woman is pregnant and the egg is implanted in that uterine wall, the glands, the cervical glands, will secrete mucus that will prevent any sperm cells from being able to enter into the cervix throughout the entire pregnancy. Okay, so no sperm can get in there and try to fertilize any other eggs. There's a baby growing in there now. And so the opening to the uterus, the cervix, is blocked by a mucus plug, which upon birth, childbirth, is one of the first things that will be delivered, the mucus plug. That's an indication that labor is beginning. So here we are, the opening or vaginal orifice takes us through the vagina and to the cervix. That communicates both with the vagina and the uterus. We enter into the vagina and through the cervix and into the uterus. Surrounding the cervix is a region. You gotta think this is a sagittal section, right? So sagittal section, and we're looking inside. But all of this is round, okay? All this is round. So this fornix is this round region around the cervix. This is where sperm are going to collect as they're trying to get into the uterus. And they'll find that fertilized egg and fertilize it. So cervical cancer is caused by the human papilloma virus, HPV. There is a vaccine that children as young as 9, 10, 11 years old should get, so that when they become sexually active, they cannot pass along HPV. Both boys and girls should receive this vaccination so that they cannot contract HPV, because it can do damage to males. In women, it causes cervical cancer. And HPV, the virus, works like other viruses by implanting its genetic material into a host cell, and then its DNA, genetic material, integrates into the genome of that host cell, okay? The HPV virus's DNA implants into the genome in a particular region within the gene P53. Who knows what who P53 is, that gene? Who's heard of P53, the gene? Okay, you must know, as a human being, about your P53 gene. That is deemed the guardian of the genome. It protects our DNA from mutations that cause cancer. It is a tumor suppressor gene, meaning it gives rise to a protein that works to suppress tumors growth, okay? So P53, you don't want that to be damaged. Smoking damages the P53 gene in the lungs, and that leads to lung cancer. HPV disrupts the P53 gene because its DNA automatically always inserts into the DNA of the cell that is infected right into the P53 gene, messing it up. So you no longer have that tumor suppression there in the cervix, and that leads to cervical cancer. Please Google P53. As folks that have that gene, you must know about that gene. It has its own website. That's how important P53 is. Here's the uterine wall that's constructed of 3 layers. The outer layer is the perimetrium, okay? The muscular middle layer, the myometrium, and the inner layer is the endometrium. Okay? It has its different layers itself. A functional layer, stratum functionalis, and a basal layer, stratum basalis. Here we are, looking into the uterus at the line, the layers. The endometrium is here. And then we have the myometrium here. And then the parametrium. The myometrium is composed of smooth muscle. All of our organs are, except what organ? The heart, cardiac muscle. That's the only muscle that does not have smooth muscles. The rest are organs. The rest of our organs form smooth muscle layers. The endometrium. And this is the stratum functionalis of the endometrium. This is the layer that will be shed. The stratum basalis of the endometrium will give rise to a new stratum functionalis once it's been shed. Endometrium. And here in the endometrium, we have uterine glands. And these secrete, in their secretions out of the uterine glands, substances that are there to take care of the embryo, okay? Or the fetus that was from the embryo. So the uterine glands. The myometrium, that smooth muscle layer. And then the vagina has, just like we see at the stomach, rugae. These folds. It's the inner lining is a mucosa, so it secretes mucus. And we have these folds there. The opening is a vaginal orifice that's surrounded by a tissue called the hymen, which is how one can indicate if a woman has been sexually active or not. And then again, that fornix is the area surrounding the cervix into which sperm collect because they're trying to make their way into the uterus. Here we are, entering into the vaginal orifice where we have rugae to allow the vagina to expand, and here's the fornix surrounding the cervix. That's the entrance into the uterus. Fallopian or uterine tubes, interchangeable, ending in fimbriae, they catch an ovulated egg and coax it down the fallopian tube. Externally, the external genitalia, female genitalia, consists of the mons pubis, the area that has pubic hair. And then the lips of the vagina. There are outer major lips, labia majora, and inner minor lips, labia minora, that surrounds the vestibule of the vagina, okay, where we find the urethra and the vaginal orifice. So looking at the external genitalia, you see the mons pubis, the labia majora surrounding the labia minora, the minor lips, where we have the vaginal orifice that enters into the vagina, the urethra, the female urethra, as well as the clitoris, which is comparable to the glans penis, the head of the penis. It is erectile tissue as well, and we'll see that lab seen in lab. So here you'll see labia minora, label here, and labia majora, including the clitoris, the entrance into the vaginal orifice, heading into the vagina, where we find the fornix, surrounding the cervix, the entrance into the uterus, fallopian tubes, membrane, ovaries. And again, fertilization. Allowing sperm is when sperm make their way into the female reproductive tract and find an egg and the fallopian tube. And the one that can break through the surrounding, what's called corona radiata, that surrounds the egg. The first one that breaks through is the daddy. He fertilizes the egg. Externally, there are glands. Okay? There's the greater vestibular gland that is comparable to the bulbal urethral glands in males, and we will see that lab C. They secrete mucus into the vestibule of the vagina to lubricate. And then the clitoris is erectile tissue, again, that is comparable to the glans penis in males. So the vaginal orifice, the urethra, and the clitoris. Those structures here with labia minora and then the larger outer labia majora. So let's go to follicle development. So this consists of the oogenesis. Okay? Oogenesis is the development of the female gamete, the egg. Comparable to spermiogenesis in men, the development of sperm. Right? The eggs develop inside of a follicle, which are layers of cells. Okay? The follicles go through their own development as well. So you have this dual development going on. And the ovarian cycle is what happens, the changes that happen to the follicles. Not the egg, but to the follicles. So we can first think about what happens just to the follicles. The follicles are layers of cells that surround an egg inside of it. The ovarian cycle are changes in the follicles. We start with primordial follicles. Okay? And these are going to consist of a simple squamous epithelium surrounding an egg inside. Those will change into primary follicles. Now we're changing into a simple cuboidal layer of cells. Those are going to continue to increase the layers until we get stratified cuboidal cells. And then we call those granulosa cells. The primary follicles will change into secondary follicles and start to increase in size. They will also start to produce some fluid that's going to build up and build up pressure. What do you think that pressure is going to be for? Building up in these follicles where the egg is encased. What pressure, what do you think this pressure that's built up by fluid being produced is going to be used for? Oh, here is no baby, we're talking about an egg surrounded by follicles. To push the egg out of the uterus, the process of menstruation. Ovulation. All right, let's check out these primordial cells, or follicles. Okay, that are gonna be simple squamous epithelium. Okay, so just a round follicle, egg inside. We're just thinking about the cells of the follicle. Right now, we're not thinking about what's going on with the egg inside. Okay, they're on separate tracks, what's happening to them. But the follicle surrounding that egg is important. Protecting the egg inside. Okay, and it changes from primordial to primary follicles. And so in the ovary, you're gonna see follicles with eggs inside at different stages of development. Those secondary follicles become tertiary follicles, or grafted, or vesicular follicles, or the mature follicle that has developed this fluid-filled chamber called an antrum that builds and builds with fluid. It creates the pressure that's gonna push the egg out of the follicle and out of the uterus, or excuse me, out of the ovary to be caught by the membrane of the fallopian tube. And that is ovulation. So, one thing I do wanna go back here and say is that all of this, so when it comes to males do not start producing sperm until puberty, right? So they don't start producing sperm until after they're born, okay? Females begin this process in utero. The follicles and eggs are already developing in female babies inside of their mother's uterus. Okay? So that means a mother who's carrying a female child, right, is not only caring for that female child, but also for the eggs that are developing inside of that female child. So a grandmother is extremely important. It not only takes care of that female child and their male babies too, but they're also carrying their female children, are taking care of the eggs that will become their grandchildren. So once we are a mature follicle, we have developed this filled sac called the antrum, filled with fluid that will then push that egg out of the follicle and out of the ovary wall, and that is ovulation. So here we see a secondary follicle. Okay, now we're getting into this mature follicle with granulosa cells. Granulosa cells are special. They secrete estrogen. But also in the follicle, we have another population of cells, the theca internal cells. They're producing testosterone. So even in the female, testosterone is produced and secreted. Not as much as like in the male to make male secondary characteristics, but still has a role here. And then inside, surrounded by the follicle, is the egg. The egg is inside of the follicle, the ovum. Here's the nucleus, where we have 23 chromosomes. The egg is surrounded by the zona pellucidum. And here we see a mature follicle. Here's the follicle cell. Right, where we have granulosa cells here. Here are some follicle cells that are surrounding the egg. Granulosa cells secreting estrogen. Theca interna cells secreting testosterone. And surrounding the egg itself in this mature follicle, okay, it's kind of this, the antrum that's fluid filled, kind of pushes the egg to one side of the follicle. Now it takes some of these granulosa cells with it that surround the egg. Now this is called the corona radiata. This is the layer surrounding the egg that the sperm cell has to penetrate in order to get in there for fertilization. So the zona pellucida first is this membrane surrounding the egg, okay? And their the spermatozoa are gonna bind and secrete their enzymes as their helmets, the acrosomes, that are gonna try to digest and break through that zona pellucida. Okay? The corona radiata surround the zona pellucida. Okay? And they are secreting estrogen. And then we have the cumulus ovaries, and those are granulosa cells that help to anchor the oocyte to the follicle. So those are these cells here. Anchor the oocyte to the wall of the follicle. So here is the oocyte surrounded by the zona pellucidum, which is this glycoprotein, proteins covered with sugars, layer here, surrounding the egg. Okay. And then surrounding that is the corona radiata, sperm cells that are breaking through all of this, get into that egg for fertilization. So again, we have follicles at different stages throughout the ovary. Okay, we have those early primordial follicles, okay, that will change and change and change until we get a primary follicle. Okay, and the changing is just adding layers of cells from simple to stratified, and enlarging and becoming a secondary follicle, where we start to develop this fluid-filled chamber, the antrum, and finally we are a tertiary or a mature or a Graafian follicle, where we have this large fluid-filled atrium with the oocyte that's been pushed. Here is at the center, but here it's been pushed to one side and anchored to one side of the follicle and surrounded by the zona, the corona radiata. And then finally, enough pressure builds up that thrusts the egg out of the follicle and the ovary wall, and that is ovulation. But the follicle doesn't stop. The follicle keeps changing, okay, into the corpus hemorrhagicum, where there's a little bleeding in there, okay, hemorrhaging. A little blood there, but that it continues to change into the corpus luteum. This is a endocrine secreting structure. It will secrete hormones, and then finally it will start to change into, or degenerate into the corpus luteum. Okay, also called the corpus albicans. And this is fibrous tissue. That we will see all throughout the ovary. And as a woman ages, there'll be a lot of these corpus luteums because of the many rounds of ovulation that have occurred. So here we are, follicles at different stages. Primordial, with egg inside. Primary, we're increasing the number, the layers of follicle cells with the egg inside. And don't see the mature one on here. Well, this is a mature one with a large antrum that is so large that it pushes the egg out through the process of ovulation. And then it starts to degrade, starting as a corpus hemorrhagicum to a corpus luteum, to a labeled that wrong. To a corpus albicans here. And those histologically. There's a corpus albicans. So this is basically scar tissue left behind in the ovary. ovulation is the release of the egg, and that is, caused by a hormone, LH, or luteinizing hormone, that weakens the wall of the follicle to help aid with the thrusting of the egg out of the follicle. And as it leaves the follicle, it takes with it the surrounding corona radiata. So here is an ovulated egg with the corona radiata. Some of the granulosa cells of the follicle that surround it are ovulated with it. And it's gonna head into the fallopian tube. So here is an ovulated egg that has been thrust out of the ovum. When that egg is released, the follicle changes into the corpus hermorrhagicum. Okay, there's a little bleeding there, okay? And then that will change that follicle into the corpus luteum. Luteum means yellow. That acts as an endocrine gland, secreting progesterone. This is going to tell the body, don't mess with that uterine lining. There might be a fertilized egg coming. Okay? But if pregnancy does not occur, the corpus luteum is going to start to change and degenerate into the corpus albicans and no longer secrete progesterone. And the woman will be able to shed that lining. Okay? Those are just those changes we went through. Corpus luteum to corpus albicans. Corpus luteum. See the follicles there, kind of bumps along the ovary wall. There is the corpus luteum. It's kind of yellow. Cross section through the ovary. There's a corpus hermorrhagicum that will change into the corpus luteum, secreting progesterone and telling the uterus, don't shed that lining. And then, if pregnancy does not occur, then it will change into the corpus albicans, again, that is scar tissue in the ovary. The egg goes through its process of development as well, starting as stem cells, just like we saw for sperm cells. Here they're called the oogonia, 46 chromosomes. Okay. These are the prime, and then those will divide and give rise to primary oocytes that start to develop in the primordial follicles. Very immature follicles have inside of them primary oocytes that go through the process of meiosis 1. Then they stop in meiosis 1. Eggs don't continue on. They stop and get stalled in meiosis 1. And it's they'll go into the continue the meiosis, okay, prior to birth of a female baby. Okay, they'll continue. Those eggs will continue in the process of meiosis. And those primary oocytes are going to begin surrounded by those primordial follicles that we find in the wall of the ovary, the cortex. And then other stages of follicles with their oocytes inside are going to be deeper in the medulla. Here is that primordial follicle, simple squamous epithelium surrounding a primary oocyte. After birth, they have females will have all of the primary oocytes that they're going to get. Okay? And after puberty, then primary oocytes will be activated. And that's when they will resume meiosis. And we'll go from a primary oocyte to 2 haploid cells, secondary oocytes, a secondary oocyte, and a cell that doesn't go on to become an oocyte. It's called the first polar body. This is a cell that's small and would degenerate. So when it comes to the haploid cells here, you don't get two haploid cells, okay, per primary oocyte. You get a secondary oocyte and a polar body. So here's the secondary oocyte, and here's the polar body. That is a degraded cell. Secondary oocyte and the polar body, no longer a functional cell. So that secondary oocyte is what will continue on into meiosis 2. So we have meiosis 1, that gets stalled after birth and puberty, continue meiosis 1, and then enter into meiosis 2. And there you'll get a division again that will lead to the egg and a secondary polar body. And if there's sperm does not penetrate that ovum after it's ovulated, then the egg will deteriorate, and the woman will go through her monthly cycle to shed it, the uterine lining, and the blood that's built up to take care of a fertilized egg if it happens. If the sperm enters the egg, penetrates the egg, and fertilizes, then that secondary oocyte will continue meiosis 2. But you end up with the ovum, the egg, and all 2 polar bodies after meiosis 2, or after it's being stalled in meiosis 2, waiting for fertilization. And then the egg is going through its process of oogenesis. The ovary is going through the process of the follicle development, the ovarian cycle. Okay, so the oogenesis and the ovarian cycle are happening side by side. The egg inside of the follicle is developing, going through meiosis, being stalled, while the follicle cells are developing as well. While this is happening, the uterus is going through its changes. The endometrium builds up. Okay? It goes through a process of building up, preparing to be implanted, and then shedding if there is no implantation. Okay? And that is what happens during the uterine or menstrual cycle. So side by side, we have the events that are happening in the oocyte that lead us finally to 2 polar bodies or 3 polar bodies and a 1 egg that will go on to be fertilizable. And at the same time, you have the follicle cells that surround that developing egg going through its changes. These are just changes happening. So the egg is changing, the follicles are changing, the egg is changing, the follicle is changing. Egg changing, follicle changing. While this is happening, the uterus is going through this process. Menopause is when estrogen levels decrease and a woman stops ovulating. Okie dokie. That is a female reproductive.